John Doyle, Greg Jarrett, Judy Kuhn, and Uranowitz for the 2022 cast album release of Assassin. A few things before we get started. You guys received wristbands when you came in. Please make sure you have them on your wrist if you leave the event space so you don't have to recheck in. You received a copy of the album when you walked in. There are more copies available for purchase back by the register. Bathrooms are on the second floor, our cafe is on the third floor. If you have any questions, please ask our amazing staff. Now, the reason we are here tonight, we have from the Off-Broadway production director and CSC artistic director, John Doyle. Music director, Greg Jarrett. We have Judy Kuhn, who played Sarah J. Moore.
Well done. Thank you. I'm going to ask you a question before we begin. Hands up if you saw the production that went. Oh, very good. I better watch then. There'll be lots of criticism later on, I can tell you.
You closed the show, right? You saw the last one.
You were there, you saw the last one? Or
No, you closed.
You didn't get to see it? I'm afraid we didn't close the show. Something else bigger than us closed the show.
I was patient zero.
So, let me give you a little bit of background, first of all. We started rehearsal for Assassins in March 2020. And 575 days later, we did the first performance of Assassins. We had rehearsed in New York City, obviously, for 2 weeks before we stopped. I remember the day when we all realized that things were changing, and it was hard to know what to believe or not believe. And we went home one weekend. I went back to my house in Connecticut, and I said to the company, next week we'll rehearse with smaller groups of people just to be safe. And we never came back. We realized by the Sunday that there was no way forward and that we were going to have to close down. And then went back into, that was in March of 2020, and then late last year we went back into rehearsal, and luckily we had a full rehearsal period all over again, because a lot had happened in between. But let me ask you, Judy. I mean, obviously we were all disappointed, right? Of course we were.
Yeah.
But how did that manifest itself in you? I know that sounds like an odd question, but how did the disappointment of stopping, what did it do?
Wow, that is an interesting question. I don't know. I mean, I don't know if I can fully remember, but I think like everyone, everywhere, there was a sense of shock, like this can't really be happening. And this will be over soon, won't it? I mean, it was sort of hard to wrap my mind around. And I think in the beginning, I thought, oh, well, we're closed down for a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
We'll get back in a couple of weeks. And then a couple of weeks went by. And as things got worse in New York, there was this growing sense of doom. And frankly, also, the priority, it didn't seem, it's like people were dying everywhere. Whether we got to do a show or not seemed to be a little less important.
Yeah, absolutely.
And also there was, the priorities changed for those 2 years.
Yeah.
So.
Brandon, we came, when we started rehearsal, I think it's obvious to say this, but when we started rehearsal, we had a different president of the United States. Not that the show was in any way ever meant to be about encouragement toward anything, I hasten to add. But it was, and also by the time we started re-rehearsing, not only had we had the pandemic, we'd had the murder of George Floyd, so many things that had impacted upon our world. Brandon, what was your feeling about all of that?
How long do you have? That's a very complicated question. when we were going to do the show with 45 in office, it felt really important to be telling the story about bad people who do bad things. But then there was something, and then in the context of COVID and everything, something that was so much bigger than all of us, so much bigger than any one person, so much bigger than any company of 12, and so much interrogation of this country's systems. It felt even more important to tell the story once that was out of our minds. Once he was gone, we could really look at this show in the context of American systems and people, bad people who are symptomatic of those systems that need constant interrogation and unpacking. So, not that any of it was a gift. Nothing that happened was in any way positive necessarily, but I do feel that the contextual change for our show, the historical context within which our show was eventually presented, became much bigger and more important, I think, because of all of those things.
Yeah.
It's really interesting.
Yeah. Okay, so we were doing a musical that was written by, I think it's pretty unquestionable, but certainly I'm going to say it, the greatest American musical theater writer of all time. And because he changed the face of the American musical theater. He changed it in the context of people like Rodgers and Hammerstein. Of course, he was part of a development and a journey, but his voice, I always call him the Shakespeare of our time. His lyrics are extraordinary. So and as indeed is his music, and as indeed are the stories that he tells, he and his book writers, because who would ever have thought that you could write a musical about people who wanted to assassinate the presidents of the United States of America? Who would think that you could write a musical about people who put human beings into pies and eat them, etc., etc. It's a long way from a bright golden haze on the meadow. So, in terms of all the responsibility that brings with it, that body of work, Greg. Now, the person whose work you will hear most when you listen to the album is Greg's work, because he's also, of course, not also, but most importantly, the orchestrator of the piece. When I said to you, I would like you to orchestrate this musical by Stephen Sondheim, how did you feel? What did that, talk about all of that.
Well, I had never orchestrated anything before, not really. But I had worked with John Doyle a lot before, and I had worked with John on shows that had the orchestra was in the pit. I had done Pacific Overtures and Passion, and then I'd also done shows. We did a show in Chicago where there were only actor musicians. Everyone was an actor musician, but someone else orchestrated it. So I was very used to. I felt like I had an idea of how to go about it, but in terms of the sheer putting down the notes on the paper, I was very nervous. And I know that you went to bat for me, to Mr. Sondheim. That said, I've also done Assassins as a show that I've done now 3 times. It was the first show I conducted in college with a baton. So that was very exciting, also very nerve-wracking. And I'd also done it in encores. So I felt like, okay, well, if I am going to orchestrate a show, this is one that at least I feel like I know how this one goes. So I should be well prepped, I guess. But then I just sort of sat down on my computer and used Finale and used the little thing where it'll play back with the digital instruments and made sure it sounded okay and sent it to a few of my friends, and they were like, this sounds pretty good. So, yeah.
And the nice thing is that Stephen Sondheim thought it sounded pretty good.
He did, yeah. Very late in the game, it had already happened, so I was like, well, there's no time to change anything. I hope he likes it. And he did.
To give you some context to that, Steve was unable to come to our previews because he was not very well, and But he did come to our opening night, and that was the last opening night he ever attended, because he died about 10 days later, I think. So the words actor, musician were floated around there out of Greg's mouth, and I am always, it amuses me when people talk about actor musicians because it's something that didn't used to exist. But Brandon, how did you feel about having the music so physically close to you on stage, if that makes sense?
I mean, there's nothing like it, really. I mean, the show just it felt more whole, I think, than anything else I'd done. There's like a separation when it's in the pit or behind you or above you, but when it's all around you, it just like sort of helps do some of the heavy lifting for you. You just sort of like, and especially in that space too, you just like sort of disappear into this world.
And you kind of start, I always love that moment when everybody realizes, oh, I thought I came here to play the leading role, and actually that girl with the clarinet's doing more than I am. Like a lot more than I am.
You take your eyes off.
No, you can't take your eyes off them. That's exactly. How did you feel about that, Judy? You've not done one of my actor musician type ones?
Never. I can't play these things.
You play the piano, don't you?
Tiny bit. I thought it was great. Especially for this piece somehow, it just sort of made sense that they were in our world with us. I mean, it was such an abstract world that we were existing in anyway, and when they sort of became, as you called them, the facilitators, who were sort of helping us out by handing us weapons, and you know, I just thought it was kind of extraordinary. They were storytellers right along with us, and I loved relating to them and seeing how they related to the other characters in the piece.
And so let me ask you another question. How did you feel? I mean, I kind of know the answer to these questions in a way, but and I know it was a surprise to you when I asked you to do this role.
Yes, it was. I thought it was crazy.
And also a role who doesn't really sing all that much in the show, does she? Not really very much at all. But maybe most importantly of all of that, you were playing somebody who's actually still alive.
Yes.
How did that feel?
Well, I have done that before.
Yes. Not somebody who tried to assassinate you.
No, not someone who had been in prison until rather recently. I hoped that she wasn't planning to show up.
You always wondered. She and Squeaky Fro came together one night. They didn't come right on that.
Yeah. No, you know, I never really thought about that. I mean, I thought about the fact that she exists in the world and that she's still out there doing God knows what. But the thing that's so brilliant about what John Weidman wrote, where I did way more John Weidman than I did Stephen Sondheim in this show, was that he took. There was nothing biographical about the way the characters are portrayed. That we were released from trying to play them as they were, but he took very interesting little bits of their real lives and turned them into these. I mean, it's sort of brilliantly created the character out of these little tidbits.
Yeah. And so, Brandon, what about the issue of the fact that there are characters in the show with whom you play scenes, and I'm not including Emma Goldman here because they did exist at the same time, but there are characters that you relate to in other scenes who your character was dead before they were born. I mean, like, time is completely bent in the show. How was that?
It's very freeing, I think. I mean, it sort of speaks to what Judy was saying, that there was nothing really necessarily full 100%. I mean, it's historical fiction, essentially, right? I mean, there's history there, obviously, and there are facts there. But there's something very freeing about not being married to a specific timeline of events, necessarily, or a specific character trait. And so you're relating to all of these other folks that you never got to meet, and there's something really fun and exciting and interesting about that. I mean, I think it's what makes the world so brilliant is that you get to hear conversations that didn't really happen, but that could have happened, and you go along with it because it exists in this like semi-real world. You're like sort of tethered to the earth in some way, but there's this freedom to sort of explore this like ethereal part of it that I think is like, it's what makes it brilliant, and I think that's what made it exciting to play and what makes it exciting to watch.
It's kind of a world where anything can happen.
Anything.
Anything. I mean, I had a scene with someone who lived 100 years before me.
Yeah. Yeah. Who wanted to sort of make love to you.
Yeah. It's very exciting and unexpected.
Well, yeah, and Czolgosz has a scene with Emma Goldman, and you know, they were both, if you read about them in history books, it's all about their sort of social justice, you know, attributes, and John turns that sort of passion into a love scene.
That's right, the only love scene of the show.
Right, and a really beautiful, amazing, just generally in the canon of theater, like a really beautiful, interesting love scene.
Yeah. I think also, I mean, I'm conscious of the fact that we're sitting here, and that's out there, and Emma Goldman was out there, and she lived just down there. And so there are actually people who were part, some of them, not all of them, but some of them were part of New York's history as well, which is kind of wonderful, really. Greg, let me ask you another question. And it sounds like a jokey question, but it actually isn't. For the singers, particularly, I think I'm meaning. Let's leave the acting musicians aside for a moment. How difficult is it?
It's very, some of the, you know, the opening is such a lovely tune, and you listen to it, and it sounds really easy. But there's this one interval in it. I mean, getting specific, it's like, I could sing it, but I won't. There's one interval in it that when you listen to it, it's very easy. But like, you know, even great singers, which everyone in the cast was, there's a jump and it clashes with the piano, and the piano's doing the E, but the vocal does the E sharp, and it's, you know, you sort of play it again and again, and once you get it in your body, it sounds like it was always meant to be that way, but that's the genius of Sondheim, I suppose. And then when you get to like the end of the show and the world gets a little weirder, and you get to scene 16 and everyone's trying to convince Oswald to do something, he writes this amazing piece of music after a really amazing scene, and it's the most complicated thing. It's so complicated, and it's like 45 seconds long, but it takes up most of rehearsal. But the cumulative effect of it, again, it doesn't sound complicated, it doesn't sound difficult to learn. You can't tell that people are furiously being like, 1, 2, 3, sing. But that's what's, you know, that's how to teach it. And then I hope that once, I mean, you guys will know better than me, but I think that once you do those things over and over again, you start to understand the inner logic of the way he writes.
Yeah, and the incredible puzzle that's all based around everything that he writes.
Yeah, there's a lot of math.
Oh yeah. I just also think that one of the wonderful things about the score is I am unworthy of your love, which you think, oh, what a sweet song. And then you think, wait a minute, she's singing about Charles Manson, for God's sake.
But it's so catchy.
And it's so pretty. Now this musical is one of I call it a box set of musicals written by Sondheim and Weidman, right? Pacific Overtures obviously was the first. I say obviously, it was the first, which I've directed. Neither of you actors obviously were in. Greg played it when I did it down here. Then there's this piece, and then there's Roadshow. And we have Roadshow in common.
We do.
I got a much longer rehearsal period than you did it, because you did it en chorus. And I did it here at the Public, and then I did it in London, at the Chocolate Factory. Talk about that show for a bit?
Yeah, let's do it.
Are there any connections between this show and that show?
I mean, they're both really weird. They're both really bizarre worlds, again, I think, that have roots in real life and history and real people who exist, but then go off, but then John and Steve go off and do what they do best, which is sort of lift everything up off of the ground and put it into this imaginary place. I mean, what I loved about it was it's really the only like gay protagonist that Sondheim wrote, unless you're interpreting other things, but it's the only one who is explicitly gay. That was really exciting for me to play. But the connection, I think, is about starting with the real and then sort of exploding it.
And in a surreal world.
Yeah, and just like, timed, they love to play with time and like have time is not really necessarily linear in both of those pieces.
That's particularly John Weidman.
Yeah.
That's really more than anything. Yeah, I mean, Roadshow, when I was asked to do Roadshow, which is whenever it was now, I can't remember, it had been called Bounce once upon a time. It was a much longer, bigger show. They asked me if I would do it. I can remember meeting with them. I never met John Weidman, so I was terrified. He's the loveliest human being you'll ever meet in your entire life. But I was still terrified. And I met with them, and it was the piece was really long. And I said, do you mind if I take this home for I can't believe the audacity. Do you mind if I take this home for the weekend and edit it all and then send you the edit back, and that's the show I think you should do. But if you don't want to do it, I'll still do the long one. And I said, oh, absolutely. And then the edited one is now indeed the published, the one you did. But it's interesting what you say about the gay story, because there's that lovely song, I can't think what it's called.
I'm not going to remember.
There's a beautiful duet, anyway.
I'll look it up.
A beautiful duet that the two men sing together. And I was with Steve Sondheim in his house in Turtle Bay, and I said, and they said, well, we'll have to cut that song because it was written for a man and a woman. And
yeah, the best thing that has ever happened.
The best thing that ever has happened to me. And he said, oh, it's written for a man and a woman, we can't possibly do it. I said, well, it's the only song that my husband and I ever sing at home, so you're going to have to do it. And then he said, I said, but two men could sing a love song to each other. That's okay. Oh, yes. Until his dying day, he claimed it was his idea. Which really made me mad. But I'm only giving you a glimpse of that because to glimpse into how these musicals are made, right? We think it's some great, extraordinary, everybody's sitting in a room together for hours, and it's not, or at least it wasn't in those cases. He was very interesting because he didn't come to rehearsal very much, at all, if at all. He always said, I've never understood this, but he always said that he had no visual imagination. I don't believe that's true, but he liked to wait to see what people had done with his work before he made comment on it, and then he could make plenty of comments on it, actually. So you played another role with me directing.
Yes, this is true.
That as rather well-known role as Sondheim's, and you've done it twice. You've done Foster twice in Passion. Was that the first time you'd worked with him?
Yes, at the Kennedy Center. I mean, work with him. I mean, he came
for him.
Yeah, he came, I mean, he did come to rehearsals occasionally and give notes and things. But yes, it was like.
I know. Did it feel better the second time, or were you equally scared?
No, it was much better the second time. I mean, the first time he gave me, he came to our first run through and he gave me a note that turned out to be completely completely changed what I was doing in this profound way, in a great way. But it took me a day to understand what he was saying to me. But he said this, he just said to me, remember that she's a 19th century woman and her center is here. I was like, okay. And then I went up to Eric Schaefer, who directed that production, and said, he was like, no, he didn't. Just think about what he said.
Think about what he said.
And I did, and I went home and I worked on it in a very particular way, and it sort of was transformative.
Yeah. So, I don't want to dwell on this in any sad way because you'd be absolutely furious with me if I did. But, you know, of all the remarkable events that happened to us through the course of this production, I mean, I'm about to start writing a book about my work, and this one's got a lot of content, right? Because, you know, there was a pandemic, and we did have to stop for a year and a half, and the country fundamentally, I'm not sure that I'm going to say changed, I wish it had changed, but it fundamentally was rocked, and we did have an insurrection in the capital, and we did then manage to continue to work through COVID every day. Talk about every day another death. I mean, every day thinking, are we going to have a show tonight? This, you know, people had to keep their humor. And then I can remember the day when I had to tell you all that we'd lost our writer forever. How was all that part, that last part of it, Brandon?
I mean, it was kind of surreal. It was very strange because we all knew that it was imminent on some level. I mean, he was getting older, he was getting frailer, and like, you know, it was on the horizon. We could like see it coming, we didn't know when, obviously. But despite that, I think we all just thought that he would live forever.
Yeah.
I think we all just gave him this immortality that is unrealistic and really shocking when it hits you in that way. I mean,
No, he's turned out to be human.
He's actually a human being. That's so strange. And I remember us having a moment that night. I walked by you, we had just finished warming up on the stage, doing our stretches, and it was very somber and quiet, and I passed you, and I was like, how are you doing? Are you okay? And you're like, yeah, I'm all right. I'm feeling very grateful that we got this.
Yeah.
And that sort of shifted it for me, because that night I was listening to Move On in my car on my way to the train station. I just like almost got in several accidents because I couldn't stop. And I was feeling very sad. I think we all were, rightfully, obviously. But there was something and then you said it's selfish to need more. You said it feels selfish to want more from a man who gave us
Such a lot.
More than we deserve.
That's right. I think what's interesting to me too is that he, you know, the number of people that I meet who I know never met Mr. Sondheim, who were very, very upset, and much more than I was, and he was a personal friend. And I think there's something so interesting about how certain artists, they reflect our brokenness. If that makes any sense to you, they have, and there's something in his own curmudgeonly, broken, humorous, joyous, loving, screwed upness that was all of us. And somehow even strangers to him knew that. And it's not just the music. I don't know what I actually think it's the words. To be really frank, I think it's the words. That somehow some of those, you know, the haiku of something like, anyone can whistle, that's what they say, easy. I mean, like, the essence of those words.
I mean, I think it is, I definitely think it's the words, but I also think it's very much what Greg was talking about earlier, those little musical shifts, those intervals that that feel natural, that seem organic,
Yeah.
but when you get down to it and when you're learning it, don't really feel that way. It's because there's like something unspoken, there's something you can't articulate about how those little things hit you with the words,
That's right.
through the words.
That's right. All right then. So, your turn. Your turn. Who would like to ask something? Don't dare leave us in silence. She's there with a mic for you. Look, it's your moment.
Speaking of the music and the actors being surrounded by the musicians, how did you balance that? I mean, orchestrating is one thing, but then you had to balance it. You know, if an actor's there and they're just only hearing the clarinet now, it had to be very challenging.
For me to start. It's a beautiful space, and the space was our friend. It has those big, it's an old carriage house. It has big, beautiful, tall ceilings. So the sound, and one of the things that you just kind of have to accept doing a show like this, you know, if you mic'd every clarinet and put a mic on every guitar, then it would just be really loud all the time. So everyone will get, and I thought this was kind of cool. It's kind of the opposite of a Broadway house where you have the proscenium, and what a sound designer does is they try to give everyone the exact same experience from the back to the front. You should be hearing basically the same thing. Whereas it would be crazy to try and do that at CSC. It's impossible. So you just sort of say, okay, well, if the clarinet's there, then that person is getting like a really nice clarinet moment right now, and I hope they like it.
Yeah, that's right. And I think I've been doing shows with actors playing instruments for a very long time. 1989 was the first one. Candide, terrible idea, but anyway. But the first 20, maybe 25 of those shows, there was no miking at all. When we first made Sweeney Todd, did you see that here in New York, maybe? When we first made Sweeney Todd in England, the whole show was acoustic. Week after week after week. Acoustic singing, the playing was acoustic. I actually loved it. Because there was nobody else in control of the work other than the performers themselves. There wasn't somebody playing with a sound, trying to make something sound better or worse or whatever. It was actually completely organically the same group of people, and this is the key to it. I mean, the ear is the key to it. The listening is the key to it. Because what Greg kindly didn't say is that I don't doubt at CSC. You go to the theatre and you see those monitors with people doing that. I hate it. There are none of those there, so it's all dependent on, whether Greg somehow manages to breathe loudly enough for them all to hear, or Katrina on her accordion goes, right, the sniff as we call them, all the way through them, because those can start everybody off or finish everything.
It's like chamber music. Really.
Like chamber music, exactly like chamber music.
It makes the audience listen, sit
It
up and
does.
listen too, in a different kind of way.
It does. And I think one of the reasons, going back to Sondheim, one of the reasons that he liked the work, this kind of work, apart from the fact that it's also like a jigsaw puzzle, it's like a puzzle, right, is that it does, because it's stripped away, it gives the words the biggest status. They're more important than almost than anything else. So they ride on top, which is so.
Judy, I went to see, I think Rebecca had taken a fun home.
Oh, yeah.
You did fun home, and I read a lot about what your feelings and stuff like that. So here we are talking about a funeral director, and now you go into Assassins. Did you make any connection with the...
Wow, no. That's such an interesting question. I never thought about it before. There's such different kinds of pieces, and of course the parts that I played were so completely different.
But I'll ask you a question in relation to that. Is there anything of Janine's work, Janine Tesori's work,
Right.
that makes you feel that she was influenced by Sondheim?
Well, I mean, that's very interesting. I mean, I suppose one thing about Janine that's very different from Sondheim is that she doesn't write words.
Yeah.
And she doesn't want to write words, she's not interested in words. But the music that she writes are all about the words that are written for the song. And the music must hold those words up, and she wants them to be, she's not interested in you being interested in the melody or what she wants you to listen to what's being said. And she like Sondheim also writes, she writes for character and for story. And she's so, I'll just tell you one little story that, the song that I sang in Fun Home, Days and Days, was written during the very first reading that we did of the piece, years before anybody actually saw it. And it was in the script, there was a scene and then it just said, song to come. And it said that for a long time, and then I was like, where's that song? We have our presentation in 2 days. Anyway, one day she came in with music, flying, and sat at the piano and played it for me, and it was amazing. And then I learned it, and then there was that one part at the end where it was a very emotional part, and it felt like it sat in a weird place in my voice, and I said, Janine, do you think this is in the right key? And she said, oh yeah, I put it in that key intentionally because I knew that would be a little bit of a struggle for you, and I thought that was good for Helen.
That's great. That's great. That's how it should be.
And that's not, I want my song to sound pretty. I want to see that character struggling there.
Yeah, fantastic.
Hi, so one of the things that really interests me with this production of Assassins is it sounds so different from Broadway, and it sounds so different from Playwrights Horizon. So I'm wondering really for all of you, like, what your relationship with previous productions was. Like, how do you interact with, like, Jonathan Tunick or Becky Ann Baker or whoever is sort of in that position for you?
Okay, I didn't see any of the Broadway. I didn't see the Broadway show or the Playwrights Horizons show. I'd only ever seen Assassins once, done by a student group in London. I had no idea what was going on. I didn't understand a single thing. So it was completely, I thought it was fine, but I thought, what is this? And also in my case, I had a lot to learn because I'm foreign. So I didn't know, I do remember, however, where I was when John F. Kennedy was assassinated. That I do, I'm old enough to do that. But the others, no. Then I was delighted to find out that most Americans didn't know who those assassins were either, which is questionable. But for me, we might all have our own different ways in. I never ever think of what a show was. I don't think of revival as being a copy in any way. I'm only interested in what it says to me right now. Whether that's right or wrong is immaterial. And I have one treasured letter from Steve Sondheim, one of those two-line letters that he wrote, that says, I think it was about company, or maybe it was Sweeney Todd, I can't remember, and it says, thank you for revivifying my show. Not for reviving it, but for revivifying it, which isn't really a word, but breathing new life into something. Right, Viva, the whole idea of it, and so that's, and then you'd never want to be a director, do you? Okay, good, because I was about to say to you also, I don't do any research, so I don't, but if you were wanted to be a director, I wouldn't have said that, because you shouldn't do that, but I don't do that. I'm only interested in what I can do with the actors I have in front of my face in that rehearsal room at that moment in time. But everybody will be different. You played your role, you know Deb Monk and you know Becky Baker.
Yeah, I know both of my predecessors. I didn't see Deb in the show. I did see Becky, but so long ago I barely remember yesterday. But they're so different from me. I just knew going in I had to do something. I had to make it come from me and put it on me. I I do like to do research, but not of other people's performances.
It's interesting. The majority of my work in my career so far has been in revivals, doing characters that other people have played. And I make it a point to stay as far away from those performances as possible. I mean, with something like this, that scene 16, I was listening to on loop, like the original cast recording, just to be like, how the fuck are we gonna do this? Like, this is an impossible feat. Yeah, I'm a firm believer that and take this with a grain of salt. I could get in trouble for saying something like this, but I sort of reject this idea of actors being transformative and chameleons. I just believe that when you are playing a character, your goal as an actor is to find whoever that person is inside of you somewhere, whatever part of you can relate to that character you bring out, and that's who that character is. So I don't like to sort of superimpose anything onto an interpretation, and you know, like Judy said, she's so different than Becky and Deb. So and I'm just very different from James and Terry and who did it at Schuler. You know, like I couldn't be more different.
You know what? It's interesting though. We did. I don't know if you saw it, but we did during the pandemic. We did a piece on virtually where the different casts spoke to each other. That was kind of thrilling. That's something that would never normally happen in any way at all. So there was a tremendous mutual support, but you know what? That's because there's a great love for the piece. And I love the fact that Deb Monk, I can still hear her saying, you know, well, it's all very well that it's become what it is now, but when we were doing it, they were leaving in droves.
No, when I was talking to Becky and Deb about the piece, they said, be prepared.
They'll walk out.
They'll walk out. And it didn't happen. And I thought, well, it's a show that finally met its moment.
Yeah.
And it's people now go, oh, yeah, yep, I get it, I get it.
In terms of the sound, in terms of the sound element of it, the sonic element of it, I did have conversations with Michael Sarapin, who orchestrated it originally and who's famous for orchestrating it. I knew he couldn't do it, right? Even if I didn't ask him to, but I knew he wasn't available to. But he said to me, you have to have somebody new who ideally has never orchestrated it before in order to find a new voice for the piece. So you own dinner at some point in time.
Yeah, I should write him an email. Sounds fun.
Who's next? Anybody? Up at the back there. Young lady, one step in. That's it.
I mean, the show, the atmosphere in it, it's very like sort of surreal and like over the top and stuff, in a good way. I was just wondering like how you guys use that sort of like over the top carnival feel to tell these more like grounded human stories.
Say the last little bit again.
To tell these, sorry, that's okay. To tell these more like grounded human stories.
Well, I do think that part of the thing about the abstract nature of it and the atmosphere of it and the atmosphere that John gave it and the you know, having these musicians on stage and all of those things, it does make, it gives, for me anyway, it gave me a sense of freedom. Like, I could go anywhere with it. I could do anything. It wasn't gonna break, you know, I wasn't gonna break anything because it was, everything was already broken.
Yeah. I mean, I think the piece, like the other two pieces that we referred to that they wrote together, you know, one is set in Japan and one is set New York and Florida, and this one is set in some kind of strange limbo. I don't know where. I mean, it's not even set in a real place. But they're all about America. All three pieces. That's what they're about, really. And, you know, we could say, oh yes, this is about these 8 or 9 assassins, but actually, maybe it's about the people who we saw in that photograph of the insurrection at the end of the show, right? Maybe it's actually about them. Maybe that means that it's about all of us, you, I include Great Britain in this diatribe, but I think what's great about their work is that they really make it look like a mirror up to nature, and yet, all of these people in this show, fascinates me that you come out and you've laughed at them, or with them, you felt sorry for them, really, you care, and for me, the reason I use the image at the end, if you saw it, did you see the show yet? The image of the insurrection that was on the thing at the end, is to say, well, these are the same people, and whilst we can turn against so many people so easily because of what the media tells us, and because of the terrible things they do, on the other hand, these are humans, and so there's some kind of deep human connection in the piece, I think, that transcends it just being funny or sad, you know? And I do think I think the last scene, the scene between Oswald and Booth, what's he called, Booth, is a fantastic piece of writing. It really is a one-act play at the end of a musical. I mean, it really is something. And that idea of that he's the one they were all waiting for, it's quite something. And I have Anne Holdwood, who was the costume designer of our show, who's done a lot of the Sondheim shows. She did Into the Woods, she did Sunday in the Park with George. She went to see a performance of it at Playwrights Horizons. And the night she was there, Jackie Kennedy was in the house. So that puts you kind of in touch with the reality of the show, really. It's staggering, really. So.
About the CD, the original, which I played the film, has got worn out. In fact, I have to send one of the fans to the question that's enthusiastic, because none of this became in. It's very limited, you know.
Right. Yeah.
Anything new on this CD in any respect?
Well, Something Just Broke isn't on that CD, is it?
Yeah, it's on the Broadway, the revival, but not on
the original.
But not on the original.
I think that's the only song, I think. Yeah. I mean, obviously, Mr. Sondheim never, well, maybe he is hearing this CD right now somewhere. But certainly, I know that John Weidman is very, very pleased with the CD. Like, very. Felt that it. But I think that's because, as well as the lovely work, I think for a piece that was so derided, I mean, it really, really was. You know, they had a Broadway house booked and everything, and it all got pulled. Because the New York Times gave it a terrible review. Thank God they don't have the same power anymore, but they did then. Well, the Gulf War was going on at the same time. But when you consider that production was so bleh, and now it's a whole different, and it's exactly the same show. We've caught up. They're ahead of their time. They're always ahead of their time. They were always ahead of their time. Yeah, all of them. You know, they find. It's interesting to me that a lot of these shows really find their life or their truth in the revivals. Yeah, I don't know why that should be, but there's something about it. Just takes time for each one to find its place. Really. One last question before you do your opportunity to sign. The lady in the back, yeah.
Thank you.
Do you have a question as well? Did you have one as well? No?
Thank you for coming tonight. This question is for Brandon. Speaking of always getting cast in revivals, and we know Classic Stage is doing a revival of A Man of No Importance. I was just wondering if you are interested in doing that show. See you in that one.
He's too young.
Yeah, too young. But we're gonna do do something
Oh
together.
yeah. We'll all be doing other things together, that's for sure.
Looking forward to that.
Yeah. A Man of No Importance is, do you know the piece at all? Do you know that musical? A little bit. There are a number of reasons why I chose to do A Man of No Importance. It's my last show at CSC, and I mean, apart from the fact that it's about a man who finds his sexuality, becomes comfortable with his sexuality through art. I'm not going to say any more than that. It's also a celebration of theatre. And that's really why I wanted to do it, more than anything, to be honest, you know. And I like the work that is, in itself, can only be done in the theatre. You know, I'm thrilled that you're all here to get these CDs signed and that you want to buy them. I'm absolutely thrilled, but I'm going to share with you the fact that I've had cast recordings made of a number of my shows, and I've never taken any of them out of the cellophane. And I know that sounds cold, but it's because I don't want to think about the past. I'm only interested in what the work means to me right now. Even the work that we made those weeks ago, I sometimes think of them walking through the street and I think, oh, we could have done that. Right? You're moving forward with the work all the time, and I think that's what theatre is to me. That's why it's not like the movies, which are great, and TV, which is great, but it is then set. And our work is somehow never set. Alrighty, thank you so much for listening.
Thank you guys so much for being here. Congratulations on the new cast album. Another applause for those of you guys don't mind. So, we are going to give a moment to reset the stage. Now is the time, if you'd like to unwrap your CDs, to do so, please, in preparation. If you would like more copies, they're back by the register. Now's the time to grab them. Also, please don't forget that on Monday, they will be having a benefit concert for Assassins, so do not miss out on that. We also have more events coming up at Barnes & Noble. On May 31st, we'll have After Fulton Haynes from Miss Memory Lane. And on Saturday, June 4th at 2 p.m., we will have TikTok sensation Noodle the Dog here for Noodle and No Bones Day. So thanks, guys. Give us just a moment, and then we'll start lining you up for the signing list.
John's